The hour is upon us, so I think we can get going. For everyone who's tuned in, my name is Ross Pally, General Manager at Venture Lane. We are a startup hub and support system for early stage technology companies in Boston, and more recently with our fully virtual programming for founders and startups everywhere. Today's topic, upgrade your product marketing to replace in-person sales. So obviously we're all operating these days in a fully remote sort of sales environment, which can present some unique challenges, which Bryan, of course, will get more into depth on. But one of the bigger challenges being the difficulty in communicating everything that you need to communicate with a lack of getting together with prospects, new customers in person, and to really hash out all the details and get them up to date on product functionality. So the focus of today's session is how you can optimize your product marketing materials to compensate for that lack of communication, lack of frequency in communication with sales prospects. So today, to help us with that topic is Bryan Maleszyk, who is co-founder and chief marketing and product officer of Worthright. And Worthright as a team right now is in the Techstars Boston 2020 cohort. They have their demo day at the end of the day today. So we are so grateful that Bryan, he's got his tie on, he's ready to go, but really truly grateful that Bryan set aside some time to prepare this content for all of us and obviously present it today on his big demo day. So we'll turn it over to Bryan in just a second. For everyone who's tuned in, quick rules of the road. If you hover over the bottom bar on your Zoom screen, there should be a Q&A button. As Bryan is going into some of his content, if you have questions or points you'd like to raise, feel encouraged to pop them into that Q&A portal, and we will very politely interject and bring those questions to Bryan. But without further ado, we will turn it over to Bryan for maybe a very, very quick sort of background on his professional experiences and what Worthright is up to, and then we'll get into the content for today.
All right, thanks, Ross. That's a great intro, and thanks for shouting out Techstars 2020. I know that there are definitely, as I see in the chat window, some Techstars alums, so hello to all of you as well. I'm psyched to be here in my home, talking to you in all of your homes. It's a very, very interesting time, but as hopefully we'll see today, it's actually not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of opportunity out there. So many people are probably asking what's Worthright, so I figured I'll start with that, so you know the background about me and what I'm doing currently at Techstars 2020 and what we'll talk about at Demo Day tonight. So currently only about 7% of older Americans can actually afford the out-of-pocket costs for senior care after they retire. And over 10,000 people a day turn 65 in America, and that's going to continue until the year 2030. Over 2/3 of those older Americans have a life insurance policy, but half of them cancel that policy to turn it back to the insurance company. But what we do is we help people convert that unwanted life insurance policy into a liquid asset that can be used to pay for senior care. So we do that through a thing called a life settlement, which I'm not going to go into today, but I will go into a little bit of how we're doing marketing. So I'm Bryan. My last name is Polish. It's okay if you can't pronounce it. Ross, you did a great job. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Worthright. I'm responsible for growth as well. I have 20 years of product marketing and technology experience. My degree is in computer science, but I'm the worst software engineer you've ever seen. And so I've moved into more product and marketing roles. And my industry experience spans things from like healthcare, financial services, and global fashion. So I have a lot of experience in enterprise marketing and product development. So that's me. And that's a picture of me before all of the barbers had to go home. So my hair's a little different now. It's being held down by my headphones. So let's talk about what we're gonna go through today. We're gonna talk about why this is an opportunity for you, and it is. And I have been helped in this presentation, and I'll give kudos when it's appropriate, by some of the other folks in the Techstars 2020 cohort who, quite frankly, could have been completely steamrolled by COVID-19 and have completely turned it around. And I'm super proud to be in the class with them, and I'm glad I get a chance to share some of the things that they did to help that. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about some of the strategies and tactics that you hopefully can use or adapt to your business and your startup, including resegmentation, creating new value propositions, and creating new ways of differentiating. Believe it or not, I am going to talk about how to use video, and there's a good reason for that. I'm going to talk about replacing the conference and trade show, and some things you can do there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about account-based marketing and turning that into something that I like to call account-based coalitions, which is really what my primary focus on at Worthright right now. And of course, there'll be conversation throughout, as there is right now, and as time permits at the end. And like Ross said, please do shout out and ask questions, and I'll stop and try to explain further. What I will say, just as I go into this, is that we need to think beyond going virtual and going online. Your competitors are already going virtual and going online. They're already there, and they have many more resources than you do to marshal and produce more media, produce more content. So this is an opportunity to do what startups are really good at, which is to be agile and to be nimble. And that's how you're going to win. I will also say that my business does not necessarily market to enterprises, but I have had to rethink my business, particularly my marketing, to work through partners, and my partners are enterprises. So I'm dealing with a lot of the things that you're dealing with today. So why is COVID a moment of opportunity for you? Well, you may have already experienced some of this in talking to your partners and customers who are enterprises. But in general, whenever new media comes out, and new media in this case just means anything digital, anything beyond meeting face-to-face, we always treat that new media like old media until a change is forced. And I'll give you an example. It wasn't that long ago, for example, that TVs weren't like a thing. But people would sit around and listen to the radio, but then TVs came along, and then you could watch something like a live baseball game without actually going to the park, which is something that we're all missing right now. But when we had to advertise on a radio station, you could only hear the voice. But when you advertised on television, you wanted to show visuals. You might want us to show visuals. You want to show pictures, because that's what TV is inherently good at, visuals. It's not a sound-only medium. But of course, if you look at the first television commercial that ever aired during a live baseball game, this is what it was.
America runs on Bulliver time.
So I'm hoping you could all hear that, but effectively, it's just a radio commercial put on television with the Bulliver watch logo. There's no visual there to sell Bulliver. Bulliver would probably do something very different if they knew actually how to build a television commercial. So they treated the new media, which is television, like the old media. And that's what happens today. That's what your competitors are dealing with, and that's what everybody in the space is dealing with. And you don't see that because you are all innovators, and you only see what innovators see, which is the new thing. But most of the people that you are going to deal with, and it's really important that you recognize this, are dealing with situation where they're trying to treat it like what they used to do. And that's why a lot of them are struggling. But when change happens, it's already happened. Once we get through this, the new ways of working are going to then be the old ways of working. So if you're nimble like startups are, that's why you'll be successful. So I'm hoping you see the things that we're going to talk about now as an opportunity. So the first thing I'm going to go into is a little bit about some of the companies that I work with at Techstars 2020. The first one is a company called Cortex. I talked to John Lair, who heads up growth marketing for Cortex. Cortex is a company. I just lost all my speaker notes, but I'll see if I can get them back. Cortex is a company that helps brands tell more compelling stories with their visuals to understand what imagery works better for their audience and their brand. And their primary industry before COVID was in travel and hospitality. You all know what happened to the travel and hospitality industry, and it probably is happening in your companies as well. There's segments of your market that are going to die. And when John actually sent out marketing emails to his travel and hospitality folks, this is what came back. So these are the automatic replies that are from people who have been furloughed or laid off in the hospitality industry. And I can only imagine what John thought when he woke up and saw this happen to him. So I want to talk a little bit about how John responded to that. The first thing that he did was he had to look beyond segmentation, beyond the travel and hospitality industry to figure out how to win. And what that means is just going out to industries and finding industries that are also going to need to use visuals to sell to people, but in industries that are trending up. So this graph here is Google Trends for home fitness as an example. And so he went and had to build an entirely new list. And he used in this case Zoom info to find people in the industries that are actually being successful during COVID. So industries like cosmetics, food and beverage, health and nutrition, household goods. There are actually a lot of industries who are doing well, and or segments of those industries that are going to do better. I'll talk about one in a second. But like jewelry, for example, Bulova would probably be a good person to target at this point in time. And so when he built that, he had to go create new value propositions around those new industries that he wasn't actually in prior to that. So the key takeaway here is to think creatively about how you can provide value to new industries that you weren't currently targeting. And it may not be as obvious as what John went through. It's obvious that something like home fitness or fashion is going to rely on visuals to sell. You may have to be more creative than that, but there are probably industries that you're not serving that you could today with just a slight change in value proposition. So he started testing those new audiences. In this case, direct-to-consumer retail was a market that he thought Cortex could really help. You can't go shopping at a mall anymore, so direct-to-consumer has a real new opportunity to win. So here he's just building using that list and building on the list. But one of the things that I think is really important from a product marketing perspective that he did was he used his product, which is an AI-driven product, to analyze your imagery, particularly on Facebook, but in other places as well. And you can actually go and see your baseline analysis of the imagery that you're using based on the data that Cortex has. This wasn't something that he had done before. He did it for us, which I thought was amazing in the Techstars program. And so he opened it up for the new industries, just so that he could show the value that he was delivering. And this is, to me, and I think the results, it's obviously early, so he's still gathering results, but if you're able to show what value you can provide rather than tell it in product marketing materials, then you're going to win a lot better. This is a similar model, if you think about it, to a freemium model. If you're offering a freemium product, one of the ways that you might do something similar is to reinvent your freemium product to be more marketing led, or to even create a freemium light model that people can try. So I think, I don't know if John's on the call. If he is, John, chime in, and if you would like to expand on it, feel free. But I think in watching Cortex's shift from where they were to where they are now in just a span of 2 to 3 weeks is pretty amazing. And this is one of the ways that they did it. So now they're no longer looking at travel and hospitality, I think, is a primary space that they're playing in, even though that was their primary industry before. They've completely shifted to new industries and new value propositions. So another hat tip, Kobu is also another Techstars 2020 company, and I talked to Ben Pleat. He's the CEO of Kobu. What they do is they turn apartment buildings into homes, and they do that by, well, prior to COVID-19, they did that by creating social experiences within apartment buildings. Obviously, there are no in-person social experiences anymore, and real estate is a legacy, old school enterprise business. So Kobu had a real challenge in figuring out how to go to market. I really like some of the things that Ben told me that they did, and they're really simple, right? So one of the things that they did was they shifted to use the term virtual community management. And it would help to understand Kobu's business. There is always a virtual community manager as part of their product, to help an apartment building create these social experiences. They simply just highlighted that it was virtual to get conversations going. And just that little bit of value proposition in a moment where real estate is really struggling, because nobody can either leave their rooms and they have all these common spaces that they can take advantage of. That's a real win just by adding a word essentially to their value proposition. He also recommended, and I thought there was no real place to put this in the presentation, but I thought it was important to say, he recommended focusing on warm leads lower in the pipeline, as well as warm recommendations in order to close sales, right? Particularly if you're in a place where you're trying to raise around, you want to show progress. That's a really good place to show progress, is closing the lower leads, the warm leads in your pipeline. He also showed me his before and after marketing materials. I couldn't take a screenshot of it because the before was 19 pages long. Remember, real estate is an old school industry. They love to get handouts. They love brochures. If you ever walk into one of these beautiful new apartment buildings in the Ink Block in Boston or in New York, you're going to get a gigantic, beautifully produced pamphlet that you can take home with you. He reduced that to 3 pages to meet the short attention spans that sort of been engendered by the people staying at home. So again, less selling and more value. And I think what Ben and John are doing kind of proves that. So I want to move to video. Obviously, we're using video now. I think everybody, Zoom certainly is doing well in this environment. But like I said before, using new mediums like video for us is de rigueur. We're used to using, especially if you're a startup that's remote all the time, and this was not really no change for you. You're used to using Zoom or video conferencing all the time. But most brands are not. So Ben also suggested that you should make sure that your video is on all the time. I like to say that you should use your face. And what he noticed was that real estate professionals use Zoom like they use the phone. They don't turn on video. And you may have experienced that with some of your enterprises. They just don't want to turn on video because it's just not something that they're used to. These folks are in their homes. They probably have their kids or pets running around. They may not have done their dishes. They may not actually be wearing pants. That is a thing. So they don't want to turn on their video. But if you turn on your video, then the social norm is that they will probably do it too. And you can establish this as your norm, where you use video by default when you have a sales conversation. You don't ask to turn it on. You just turn it on. And you let that establish the fact that this is the environment we're in and you're going to have a face-to-face conversation. It's a really small thing, but when I talk to other folks, I asked them, I never would have thought to ask this until Ben brought it up, but I asked a bunch of people, do you turn on your video by default? And they're like, I do, but sometimes they ask me to turn it off, or, you know, I don't want to seem like I'm forcing them to be on video. No, you should force them to be on video. That's the world we're living in right now. So so this is what Ben said. By turning on video by default, it forces the social norms of face-to-face conversations, and obviously you're going to close more when you're doing it face-to-face. So another thing that I realized when I'm talking to the people that I'm marketing to is that just because we can all use Zoom, it doesn't mean that my prospects can use Zoom. So we talk to these folks called geriatric care managers. If you've ever had a parent who suffered a change in health, they may have had a stroke or diagnosed with Alzheimer's, like my co-founder and CEO Aaron, his mom was diagnosed with. You usually will go to somebody like a geriatric care manager who will quarterback the care that they will get during the time of transition. We're using geriatric care managers to build trust with the people that they work with their families who are a real target. Those are the folks that have life insurance policies. But in order to do that, we have to help them with the things that they're struggling with today. Not just help their families pay, but it's really important that we are a trusted partner of theirs. And they've been struggling with this because they can't go see the people that they're supposed to care for. So I saw this a couple weeks ago on SNL. I don't know if you all did. I'm not going to show obviously the whole clip, but when I started having conversations with geriatric care managers, it went actually a little like this.
It's been reevaluating which of my mugs I think are the funniest. Okay, now this isn't right, is it?
Yes, and I recorded my own commentary for A Dog's Purpose. I think this is not right.
You just don't need to be so close to the camera.
Okay, well, I've been calling into QVC and telling them.
So if that might be funny, but that's actually my real life all week last week. I had very similar experiences to that. They're very, very uncomfortable on video. They're very uncomfortable. They want to do it, and they actually feel like it's necessary because they can't go meet with their families because their category of folks have been deemed unessential by the government. So what we did was we put a free webinar together on how to engage with families virtually through things like Zoom and video conferencing, among other things. We wanted to test this to see if it actually worked. So we put out the call to action to register for the webinar, and the acceptance rate was 85%. It's opening new relationships with new geriatric care managers that we hadn't had before, and it's doing it in a way that really has nothing to do with our product, thing that we are actually good at because we live in all the time, and they don't. So if you can put aside any sales things and build relationships, even if it's not something that is related to your product, that is going to help you in the long run.
Bryan, very quick.
So similar to
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Quick interjection. 85% acceptance rate for sending out advice or webinar is stellar.
Yes.
Any other attributes of the marketing materials themselves, or the way that you engage people to sign up for that webinar that you think attribute to the 85%? Because that's an unbelievable number.
Yes. Thank you. That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Let me go into, so this call to action is, how do I describe it? Fake. I actually didn't have this. This was an idea that I wanted to test prior to actually building anything. We did end up putting together a landing page that looked like this, but I actually created this before I put that landing page together. the way that I did this was I used duck soup in order to reach out to current geriatric care managers on LinkedIn. And in my connection message to them, I basically said, "Hi, my name is Bryan. We run this company that helps families pay for care. But when we've talked to geriatric care managers, we've noticed that they're struggling to connect with their families. We'd like to help you with that for free. We're putting a webinar together. If you'd like to join, then just like connect and contact me." And 85% of them did. That it was literally just a duck soup connection through LinkedIn. And so it makes that 85% even more, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, even more impressive, because it wasn't even like it was in literally a LinkedIn message to them. So, yeah. And I think what Aaron and I ended up discovering about this is that these people, like when you are really they are really struggling. They feel that they're losing revenue. They care about their families. When you really find a pain point like that and you give them a solution, then the floodgates generally will open. And I'm not making a sales pitch here. I did say what I did. I wasn't dishonest about that, but it wasn't the primary call to action. Most of them reached out and said, "I'd like to hear what your company does." And then after that, they were like, "I'd absolutely love this webinar." I guess I saw the question from Monica. Monica, it's called Ducks Soup, DUXSOUP. It's basically an automated way to reach out to through LinkedIn. There's somebody at Venture Lane who's an expert at it. The way that I learned how to use Duck Soup is through a man named Brian Denenberg. And Brian is an awesome dude who just knows this stuff. Probably should be giving this presentation anyway. But Brian is the guy that I learned how to use Duck Soup.
Brian is terrific, and if anyone wants to get in touch with Brian to talk about that tool or anything else, just reach out to me, ross.pally@theventurelane.com. I'll put it in the chat and happy to make that intro.
Ross, did I answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay, great. Sure. Yeah, so we were happy about that. These are not folks that we sell to. These are folks that we're going to market through. And Susan, yes, thank you for posting Duck Soup in the chat. And by the way, after the presentation, I can also provide a list of the tools that we've used to Ross, and Ross can disseminate that as well, including the tool that John used, which is ZoomInfo. If you haven't used that, it's actually a really great tool for list building as well.
Brian, sorry, last interjection for a bit. We did have one question come in about ZoomInfo. Do you guys use a free or a paid version of that?
I think that ZoomInfo might be providing a free 21-day trial.
Got it.
And John used the free 21-day trial to build that list.
Got it. Sounds good.
And so that I think that's just a hack. I think we're all familiar with those. So, however, I would say that if you are relying on building new prospect lists like John is, I would use the paid version. If you feel like you have a really good hypothesis about an industry, then it's worth it to pay for something like ZoomInfo or something like Duck Soup, which helps, again, automate outreach on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so obviously webinars are a good way to replace the conference in some ways. Like Ross, you said, 85% response rate to a conference is not to a webinar invite is not a usual response rate. 35% is probably really good, or 35% attendance is really good. So I wanted to think about ways that we could replace a trade show or a conference with the buyer side of our market, as well as the geriatric care managers and the marketing side of our content. So the buyer side of the market are the people that buy life insurance policies. they are essentially institutional investors, or large financial services companies that represent institutional investors. They are the pillar enterprise financial services company who do deals on the golf course. And many of them, in fact, are based in southern climates like Florida and Arizona, where there's a plethora of seniors. So in January, Aaron, my CEO, went to one of the conferences, one of the premier conferences of this space, and it was very clear to us that face-to-face relationships with these folks were going to be key. And of course, that was all pre-COVID-19. So we wanted to figure out how to do something to replace something like a trade show, because trade shows aren't really working. But the thing about trade shows is they don't go to hear your sales pitch. So webinars aren't really a great approach to that unless you're doing something like I talked about earlier, which is to just provide value regardless of your product. What they really go to conferences and trade shows for is to discover what's new and different about the industry. They go to learn, but you can't learn anything when you're just sitting at home. It's a real problem, particularly for middle managers and senior managers who are not executives. They want to understand how they can be better in their industry. And professional networking groups are struggling. So I tried to get a screenshot of the website for the professional networking group that's established for geriatric care managers, and their website was down and is still in fact down. Like they can't even, this is an extreme example, but professional networking groups by and large are not helping their constituents through this because they're just not capable of doing it. They don't understand how to use modern approaches to create an environment where people can learn from home. Most people would just assume that they want to create classes online and use email, and that's pretty much the extent of what they're doing, which is not helping folks like geriatric care managers. And we all know that being alone sucks. So if you can help your buyers find ways to connect with each other and you own that experience, then you can, first, it's going to be an experience that pays off over time for you, because if you build a place for them to come and talk to each other, you're essentially creating a new professional networking group where the old ones have failed. This is a new experience for us. We're just starting to test this. So those geriatric care managers that have responded to our webinar, one of the things they said was that we just have no way of talking to other folks like us anymore. And we miss that a lot. So we're going to build a Facebook group for them that they can come, private group. They can come in and talk. We're just going to get out of the way. So we have no results on that. I wish I had a number like 85% for that. That's brand new. We're getting it set up. We're inviting folks in now. But I've done things like this before, where if we wanted to get people together and talk about their problems, it's a great way to learn about a problem. I did it for hospitals in a previous life, and I'm doing it for care managers now. So places like that you might already have, like customer advisory groups or beta programs, your freemium program, or even just segmenting your top customers, they're a great place to start. Get them together and start talking about the problems they have in the industry so that they can learn from each other and get out of their way. Eventually, you'll be able to market to them as well, and you'll be able to talk to them about things that you do to help them, your product does to help them, but you will learn about how to talk to them by listening to them first. So make it as frictionless as possible to join and get out of their way. So in the absence of a community, build a virtual one and use the existing tools like Facebook and LinkedIn, wherever it's as frictionless as possible, wherever they may already be gathering in individual terms, build something where they can talk and promote content that doesn't necessarily have to be about your product there. And this is the last thing. This is not something that that we're doing now, but this is something that I've talked to a number of people about in preparation for this. I'm a huge fan of account-based marketing. If you don't know what account-based marketing is, then I'll give you a brief overview about it. Essentially, account-based marketing is that you pick a number of target accounts that you have that you want to win, and then it's usually used when there's multiple decision makers and buyers in an organization, which is why it's generally the accepted way of marketing for enterprises. And then you target each of the individual roles that are decision makers with different value propositions based on their role. But by and large, account-based marketing is still a way to market to an individual person, right? You might have, I'll use Cortex as an example. One of the things that they did in Techstars was to figure out who their buyer was. They might have a marketing manager, and that marketing manager simply wants to look good in the meeting when they're talking to their VP. And you might talk to the VP in a very different way, or the CMO in a very different way. So I had a former founder at my former employer. His name is Paul Williams. He's now a partner at the company that bought his company called PK Global. He used to say, our mission is to help our buyers get promoted. And he's right about that. But now I think we're slightly different. It's a slightly different message. Given COVID, it's our mission is to help our buyers stay employed. And what you're really trying to do is help them with the things that they're doing at their quote unquote office when they're not able to do it. So by using the value proposition in your product, you still need to do account-based marketing. You still need to target your accounts. You still need to go after each of those individual roles. But employees are not connecting with other people. You can't rely on one employee to influence a discussion when that discussion is no longer happening in a conference room or the water cooler. It's simply just not going to be as effective as it was when people gathered in an office. There also has been significant rifts who have reduction in force have put most of these employees on their toes and have kind of removed some of the people that have been influencers or were supposed to be influenced. So these folks need to show value in order for them to make sure that they're making a difference in their organization, and you need to help them with that. And in order to do that, you should try and understand what drives influence. So one of the ways that I heard from a company, not a Techstars company, from actually employer that I used to work with, one of the things that they're doing, they're a large technology consulting company, but they operate like a startup. They just rebranded and things like that. What they're doing is they're identifying ways that each of those employees can make a difference in their own organization and building content and content marketing to help them make a difference with the other people in their organization by using what they do, which is basically improving their knowledge of technology. And so what their calls to action are and I wish I had an example of it, but I didn't get one in time, are things like help drive, in the case of a railway company, for example, if they're trying to sell dashboards to a railway company or building a dashboard for a railway company, what they would say is, if you're having a conversation about data, here are 5 ways that you can have that conversation about data online. They provide that material to them in a way that's easily shareable on a Zoom or on video. And they provide specific instructions on how to share that with their employees. And then if they have another employee who they know is related to that person, that decision maker, they will then send a message that basically allows them to accept the material that they're getting from the first person. So they're actually building the relationship between 2 people at the same company by using their marketing. It's a pretty sophisticated way of doing it, but the one thing that he told me that they did that's relatively simple is they built into their CRM, which in their case is Salesforce, but you could do the same thing in HubSpot or whatever CRM you use, is for every individual at a company and at a lead, they built in fields that said who that person would influence. And then they try and market to the 2 people that influence each other. And they ask the question about who they would be, who they might impress, basically, if they were able to make these decisions, or if they were able to tell a story to those people, how they would influence them. And the connections in their CRM allow their sales team to go in and say, okay, if I send a message to person A, I also need to send a corresponding message to person B, and even reference the two people. So, hey, person A said this, but you may need, in order for that person A to be successful, you may need these materials. And so they're trying to build success among small teams who are remote in those industries, which I thought was really interesting, in a very different way of building account-based marketing. It's basically they're trying to build coalitions. So I give credit to Paul in that regard. So finally, we're never going to be more agile than we are now. I know we're kind of coming up on time. That's my CEO said that when all of this started to happen, and I firmly believe that's the case. We're only 2 people, but even if you're a startup of 5, you're still never going to be more agile than you are now. And you can make these turns faster than most of your incumbents can, and your competitors can. And if anything, you are in position to provide value because because the people that can provide value today are the people that can change the fastest. So key takeaways: don't rely on sales materials to get buyer attention. You need to provide value. Focus on segments that you can win, and drop segments that you can't win. Build messaging and value propositions specifically for those segments, and test them religiously. The one thing that I think John from Cortex did that I really liked is that once he had those value propositions, he put an A/B test on his landing page to test 2 different versions of those value propositions, in his case for direct-to-consumer retailer companies. Like Ben said, use your face, make video your default, and don't let anyone make you turn it off. Be helpful if it's not related to your product. Especially if it's not going to cost you anything, and you can help them through a difficult time, you can build relationships that will pay off in the long run, or even in the short run in our case. Build community in the absence of it. So try to build on the communities that you have. If you haven't done that already, start to try to build communities where people would find value in talking to their peers when they're not doing it today. And then build coalitions at companies when they're completely remote.
Great recap. I'm sitting here doing takeaway notes to run through at the end, and there it is. You had the slide all ready to go.
Yeah, that's the most important slide, I think. So,
Bryan, thank you so much. I think wonderfully helpful in terms of going through some almost case study like examples, and really getting into the weeds of what are some tactics that some of our listeners tuned in can start to deploy today, tomorrow, this week, to try to gain some ground on the product marketing side in the absence of being able to do a lot of the selling in person. I'm just going to take over the screen for one quick moment.
Yep, I'll stop sharing.
Yep. Some closing remarks. So for everyone who is still tuned in, we have a couple of upcoming webinars coming to you from VentureLane. So later this week on Thursday, we have how to secure angel funding when a recession hits. So we'll have Christopher Mirabile, Senior Managing Director at Launchpad Venture Group, sort of giving us his update and his inside view on how the angel investment community has been affected by the current climate, what sorts of activities he's seeing, and what strategies might be helpful for raising an investment round from angels as opposed to larger institutions. And then coming up next week on Tuesday, we have video lead generation for a fully online world. So I'm sure expanding on some of the points that Bryan brought to us today. And for that, we have John Paduchak, who has been a strategic live video and webinar marketing consultant for over 20 years. So that's coming up next week. And you can always go to that link down at the bottom, take a screenshot of the slide to see the full program and event calendar for VentureLane that is coming up. So I'll stop sharing. So once again, Bryan, thank you. Thanks for making the time. You have your demo day tonight. We are eternally grateful. And good luck on the demo day. Is there a way that we can tune in for anyone who's on the webinar to see your pitch tonight?
Yeah, actually, I'll share folks are taking off on the webinar, but I'll share the demo day link right now, and I'll give it to you. Feel free to share it with the folks who attended if you can.
Perfect. So we'll share that link in the chat. Thank you again, Bryan. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you all on Thursday. Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks all.